Welcome. Where's my here? Welcome back to Digging Deeper. I probably peaked the mic like I always do. It's been a while since we've done one from the live studio. Good to be back. And boy, do we have a good one for you today. We have some brand new research from Randall Reilly, and we're here to give you all the goods on why some markets are hard to hire drivers in and some are not. Some are not. Some are not as hard. Want me to do that again? And we're back. All right. So, Seth?
Yes.
So we have, I think most people on the call are aware, maybe they're not, I don't know why I called it a call, but most people are aware Randall Reilly has a product called Stratus. And in Stratus, we have a platform called Strategize. And within the platform of Strategize, we have a thing called a recruiting difficulty score.
Yep.
And what it does is it takes all these elements and determines how difficult the driver that you're going to hire, how difficult is that going to be? Now, when we say it's hard to hire them, I think that might be a little bit opaque as to what we mean. So when we say hard to hire, what are some of the things that you're going to experience if the difficulty score is higher in a given area? So, And I probably should add the context. So when we say your specific driver, that can mean the qualifications you need, the area for which you're hiring, the route for which you're hiring. It's looking at those specific things. So when we say it's going to be difficult, what does that mean specifically?
Yeah, it can mean a few different things. One of them being that drivers just aren't showing interest in the job.
Right.
And we'll talk about different reasons why that could be, but you've put it out there that we're hiring and you're just not getting a lot of response back.
So low response.
Yep. I think another possibility is you're getting decent response or even a really good response, but you don't end up hiring any of those individuals because it's not a good fit for a number of reasons.
Mm-hmm. And so all of those components, everything you said, like the result of that, like that's going to show up in your reporting, if someone's like, well, show me the data. Well, it's going to be increased lead costs.
Yep.
Or even if lead costs don't go up, maybe lead costs don't go up, but then your lead to hire ratio may look worse. I always can't tell whether you say go up or go down, but the lead to hire ratio will be worse. And then obviously because all of that, your cost per hire inevitably will be much higher for that specific thing.
Right.
And I think what happens with a lot of, you and I had a conversation about this recently about how people look at their cost per hire, but if you're a fleet and you have different terminals and regions and routes that you're hiring for, and you lump them all together, you may go, well, over here we're able to hire a driver for X. Why can't we do it here? Why should it be any different? So that's why we're here today, is kind of look at what makes it different. And I will say for this, sitting over there behind the camera is Zach Miller. He wrote this thing, and he worked with David Miller, who is kind of our resident expert on all of the data that goes into Strategize. They do what's called a regression analysis, which I'm not sure what that means, but maybe they can post the meaning of a regression analysis up here to look at what are the actual contributing factors. So when we post a score in Strategize and say, this is a 9 out of 10 recruiting difficulty, which I think a lot of people, like Indeed has those sort of metrics.
Yeah.
And so what we want to look at, what are the big driving forces that determine that, so that you can kind of, when you see that, you can understand and maybe even start to look at some of these on your own. So we're going to talk about what are the determining factors. And then after that, we'll say, well, what do you do in that case? Because it's not like you can just say, well, we'll stop hiring drivers in those areas. I mean, you have to have drivers in those areas. So what do you do then?
Yeah. One thing I wanted to mention too is, I remember working with a company and we had recruiters in different areas across the country. And at that time, I didn't have a lot of data sets to give me that type of information.
Right.
And I remember recruiters would be like, hey, it doesn't seem fair that certain areas of the country, like those recruiters are always getting a pat on the back, like, great job, you guys are killing it, good work. And then other areas, they're like, is it the recruiter's fault?
Right.
Is it the area? But so like a recruiting difficulty score evens the playing field a little bit, right? Where you can say, well, yeah, they're getting fewer hires there because of these reasons.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And so let's jump into some of those reasons. So the first things we're going to go over specifically, by the way, this is unreleased research that will be released very shortly after this. But I had to print it out to make sure I said some of this right. And hopefully there'll be plenty to help you follow along here. But so one of the first things that you look at of market factors that determine it being difficult to hire in a specific area is low unemployment. And not just low unemployment specific to trucking, but just low unemployment in an area. So, and the idea is as soon as like the unemployment rate falls below like 4% in an area, across the board, anyone hiring, your recruiting costs will rise, your time to fill increases, and there's going to be fewer people actively looking for jobs. So there's just a smaller population to pull from.
That's right. And it makes sense, right? That if the individuals in that area are employed, and gainfully employed and satisfied, then it's just going to be tougher to find them.
Number two, so if we got a list going. All right, number two, higher wages. So with higher wages, and this is specific to drivers, but when the median driver wage exceeds $65,000 per year, you'll see that turnover drops. And as you know, when turnover drops, it's much harder to get people to switch jobs.
That's right.
So all those factors that we talked about are going to happen to where it's like either you might be higher lead cost or a worse lead to hire ratio, and ultimately a higher cost per hire, increased cost per hire. The third factor, so we've got one was low unemployment, if you're in an area with low unemployment. Two, if you're in an area with high wages where the median wage is $65,000 or above. All right. The other is low industry employment concentration. So this fancy way of saying there's just not a lot of drivers in the area, which we see. I think we run into this one a lot. Maybe you have a story you can tell of, we always go to, it feels like every time we talk about this, it ends up in Wisconsin, but it's like they're hauling some lane way north with like, it's going to be cold, snowy roads, and nobody wants that. There's not a big population there. And so it's like, if there's just not a big population to pull from, it's like the smaller the audience, it's just like there's less fish to catch, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when there's a small population of drivers in the area, your target market may be 200 people.
Right.
And so when you talk about advertising to 200 people, it doesn't matter what platform you're using, it becomes very difficult to get that granular.
All right. Next one, number four, and keep in mind, this is all market conditions. These are market conditions, and then we'll layer stuff on top of this. Number four big component that makes a specific area hard to hire in. If there's been limited hiring activity in the past 12 months, which this is more like a lag measure of just where the industry's at in general. But if you see like just hiring in general, if there hasn't been much going on, well, that's the sign kind of, hey, other things are happening in the market and it's just going to be more difficult.
Yep.
All right. And then here is a real key one that I think people in the world of driver recruiting all have dealt with, is that if there's high job posting activity, so that's just an idea that there's a lot of competition for drivers in that area. Obviously, that's going to make it more difficult. They have way more competitive offers to look at all the time. I know, so you can give us a little bit, but you have a alias, Hank Seeker. And can you tell us some of your experiences of like filling out an application on a job board and then what ensues after that?
If you're going to a specific company's landing page, that's one thing.
Right.
You're filling out something specific to that company. But some of the other job board type stuff, you fill out one thing and that could go to lots of different companies. And not always a bad thing, but it does mean that that driver could get inundated with messages,
Right.
phone calls, text messages, emails. I've spoken with drivers one day and, hey, we had a great conversation with them about it. They're pumped. They're excited.
Right.
And then I speak with them the next day and I'm acting like I know them because I was like, yeah, I just spent some time with you yesterday. And they're like, wait, who are you again?
Yeah.
What company is this for? Can you remind me again what you guys are paying? It's because they're getting so many messages
Right.
that they're even having a tough time keeping it straight, which now they're comparing 4, 5, 6 companies. And yeah, it just makes it a lot more difficult.
So just to put a little meat on that bone, I don't want to give away all the secret sauce here, but so according to our data, when a CDL job postings exceeds 75 per 1,000 drivers, that's when we basically consider it a very competitive market. And that's when it's like, it's going to be hard to get heard among the noise. And so we also found for every 200 additional companies posting CDL jobs within that area, that recruiting difficulty score gets bumped up a point. So that's that. And I think that's one of the biggest drivers of difficulty is competition. All right. And then our sixth and final one, and I probably need to distinguish this from the previous one about low industry employment concentration. So that's driver specific, how many people are in the driving industry in a given area. There's also just the general market condition of it's just a small labor force. So if you're advertising in an area, like whatever the parameters of your advertising area, if it's below 500,000 in general, that's considered low population. And it's the same effect essentially of there's just not a lot of people there.
Yeah.
Now, these are all the market forces that drive a recruiting difficulty score to be high. This is how we have determined it, and the regression analysis proved these to be true. So those, when we think about, is it going to be difficult to hire? Are we going to have high lead costs? Or maybe we get plenty of leads, like maybe there's a lot of competition. We get plenty of leads, but there's so much competition that our lead to hire ratio is bad, which all of this will obviously drive our costs per hire up and make us hire less drivers. Now, those are just the general market conditions that everybody, regardless of what type of driver they're hiring, are going to experience. Now, there are confounding aspects that you can layer on that are unique to each fleet. And why don't you tell us about some of those, because your expertise in trucking is far superior to mine.
Now, like you said, it's just all about layers.
Yep.
So you kind of covered some of these broader topics, but then, yeah, we can get down into some of the specifics. One of the first ones being experience requirements. And it's interesting that we kind of found a tipping point using the data that says, hey, with 18 months requirement for experience, you're going to have a little bit of an easier time finding those drivers. But then once you get to the 24 months or 2 years, it starts to tilt the other way, becoming more difficult. And I mean, it makes sense because new entrants into the markets, right? They've got some experience under their belt now. But once you start upping the ante there for how much experience they need, you start shrinking the pool.
Do you think, would you say experience requirements are one of the most, how would you say it, restrictive filters that you can put on your hiring efforts?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just one that right off the bat either qualifies or disqualifies you. You either have that experience or you don't. And yeah, as soon as you start turning up that dial, the pool begins to decrease pretty rapidly.
Okay. And what else can we layer on top of that to make it more difficult?
Yeah, it's home time and route preference.
Okay.
And I think as individuals have been in this space for any amount of time, it goes one way or the other, where they're just used to being over the road, out for 2, 3, 4 weeks at a time, and they've adjusted their lifestyle to that. Or they go, I've done that and it doesn't work for me. I can't do it. So the longer that they're out, it can become more difficult to find them. A lot of people just want that local driving job, get home every night. There's only so many of those to go around.
And you can see how if you were to start layering on all these things we're talking about,
right?
So you're in a geographic area where there's a low population, and unemployment's very low, but also you require 2 years of experience, and you're out 3 weeks at a time. All these things compound to mean you're going to experience some of those things we talked about of your cost per hire ultimately is going to be high, but it may be like less leads, or the leads that you get, it's very hard to convert. So just keep in mind, as we layer all these things on top, everything is compounding and getting worse. All right. What's another thing we can layer on top of that is unique to a fleet?
Yeah. So maybe they need a specific endorsement,
of course,
or special licensing. And that depends on the haul type, which makes sense. But, if you're only looking for guys that have a hazmat endorsement, well, you've now continued to shrink the pool.
Mm-hmm.
And when you layer on top some of these other things that we've already talked about, you can see how it quickly goes from this to this.
Right.
Maybe a TWIC card so they can get in and out of ports. All these additional layers just means your pool is getting smaller, making it harder and harder to find that exact driver that you're looking for.
Right.
And then to jump into the next one, haul preferences. So drivers get experience in a certain area, and at times they'll want to switch and get more and different types of experiences. But a lot of times you'll find that, hey, if they're used to being an auto hauler, they just want to stick with it.
Right.
It's what they know. It's what they're good at. They know what the pay should be. Or maybe it's flatbed. They tarping and strapping, and there's just a different skill set there that they either like or dislike. And we just keep talking about these layers, but as you add them on, it just becomes more of finding that very specific individual in that market becomes a challenge.
All right. What can we do to mitigate the effects of a difficult market?
Yeah, it's once again, this comes down to strategy and looking at the channels that you're using to target them. Are you only targeting the active seekers?
Right.
Those who are using Google search, for example, that's a very active, they're typing something in to say jobs near me or looking up a specific company.
Right.
But what about those individuals who are employed, not necessarily actively looking, but if the right opportunity came along, they would consider it?
Okay. All right. And that makes that makes sense for some of those specific market conditions of, hey, there's just not a lot of drivers in the area. If you're only waiting on people who are actively looking, actively submitting, interest forms or applications to job boards, it's really shrinking your pool down.
Yep.
All right. What else can we do?
Employer branding, especially if, let's say you just got a new contract or something and you're moving into an area you haven't been in before.
Yeah.
You got to somehow let the drivers know that you're there and what you offer. And you talked about this earlier too. It's understanding who you're competing against, because maybe the offer that you thought you would come in with, as far as pay, in one market, that may not be sufficient for this other market that you're in. So do your research ahead of time to find out what would be competitive, and begin to build that branding story there. Right. To get out ahead of it.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Maybe one more. Let's do one more. So all that was kind of specific to the general market conditions. We haven't really talked about specifically the layers that you're adding to it as your unique fleet. Let's do one more on the tough market challenges, and then let's look at what do we do about our specific qualifications. Where can we help ourselves there?
Yeah. So you may have, a favorite one that you want to pick out as well. But, one place I often see people start is reduce that barrier to entry.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be, like we talked about, expand the geographic area.
Yep.
It could be, hey, we were saying we needed 2 years of experience. Maybe it is 18 months. Maybe that would be okay without impacting insurance rates or some of those things that fleets have to take into consideration.
Yep.
Or maybe it's, hey, this specific endorsement is required. Well, come on board. We'll keep you busy, and then we'll pay for you to get that endorsement.
Right.
So that you're not coming out of pocket for that. So those would be some little things that you could start with that could actually have a big impact on it.
We've layered on additional qualifications that are going to make it more difficult to find drivers? What are other things that we can do to help ourselves?
Yeah, there may be things that you can adjust there. Like I said, the endorsements or the experience required, training, where maybe you would take somebody who doesn't have experience doing that particular thing and be willing to train them up. So instead of saying, hey, you've got to have 6 months over the road flatbed experience, say, hey, you can come in with no experience but just expect to have some training period there to get you up to speed.
Now, I see something that we've talked about here in this white paper that talks about, I honestly don't know much about this, but it talks about a slip seat fleet. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how that would help you kind of fill those difficult roles?
Yeah. I mean, you've got all kinds of drivers out there, and their willingness to maybe go out for 3 weeks, or maybe it's just for 3 days, right? So instead of saying, hey, this is this individual's truck assignment, nobody else will be in this truck, you could have individuals who are then, the slip seating is you have multiple people using the same truck at different times. That way you get some flexibility in home time. Like, hey, if you want to stay home for a week or two, that's your, let's schedule that. Somebody else is going to be out there using your truck.
How do drivers feel about that? Is that negative among drivers, or? It
can be, depending on how well the truck is detailed.
Right.
And there's a cost associated with that. But yeah, nobody wants to get into a dirty truck.
Right.
So yeah, there's things like that to consider.
But I bet the cost associated with it is not as much as the revenue loss of the truck not moving.
Right. Yeah. But different programs like that to just create some flexibility with home time can be really helpful.
What about part-time? Could you utilize kind of part-time positions to help, I guess, ease the burden of these hard to fill positions?
Absolutely. I can't tell you how many drivers I've spoken with who are maybe further in their age that they don't want to get out there forever.
Right.
But they would be happy to go run for a week or two and then come back for a while.
I think my uncle's done some of that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of individuals like that just want work occasionally. And so, when you're in a tough spot, it'd be amazing to have a list of people you can call on to say, hey, we really need you. Can you grab this load for us? And there's guys willing to do it.
Well, there's more here, and I think we could get into all of it. I do want to add one more thing before we close here, is that I think one thing that you can do to help yourself, regardless of whether it's market conditions or you're recruiting very specific qualified leads, is you can't afford to lose. If you get one of these hard to find leads, or you're in a specific competitive where there's maybe a lot of leads, but it's just very competitive, you can't afford to be losing them in the process of how you manage the lead, how you're following up with the lead, all this sort of thing. So remove as much friction within your hiring process. Get that process nailed down of how you move drivers along all the way from initial interest till they're at orientation, because that is a huge component of increasing your lead to hire ratio. And I think that I think it's an overlooked component many times.
Yeah. And obviously we want to respond to everyone as quickly as possible. But if a recruiter is working in multiple areas, a deep understanding of, hey, when a lead comes in for this area, I've got to prioritize that. I've got to hit that one first because it's few and far between. And I might have to try to get in touch with them 6 to 8 times instead of 2 to 3 times.
Right.
Because that's what it requires to get it done.
Well, I think that's a great spot to end. I appreciate everybody joining us. Please stick around for the live Q&A, and you can ask whatever question you want, and be on the lookout for our newest white paper on how to hire in tough driver markets. Thank you.
Boom.